Hey, sweetheart. A voice called from the benches, dripping with sarcasm. You lost? Pilates classes are in the civilian rec center. A roar of laughter erupted from the line of candidates waiting to sign out their rifles. Sergeant Damon Riker, a broad-shouldered veteran with tattoos creeping down his arms, smirked as he leaned back in his chair. His buddies slapped the table in amusement, eyes locked on the newcomer walking into the armory. The target of their mockery was a woman barely 5'3", carrying herself with quiet posture. Her name was Clara Harlow, 35 years old, a civilian engineer who had volunteered for the military's most unforgiving advanced marksmanship selection program. Unlike the others in the room, battle-tested operators with combat tours and scarred knuckles, Clara looked like someone you'd find reading in a coffee shop. Her dark hair was tied into a no-nonsense braid, her olive-green sweater tucked neatly under issued fatigues. A slim pair of glasses rested on her nose, catching the fluorescent light overhead. Her hands were steady as she filled out the weapons sign-out form, though the laughter around her threatened to shake the walls. You sure about this? Another candidate, Private Torres, chimed in. He held up a Barrett M107 like it was an extension of his own arm. This program isn't for weekend warriors. You're better off writing reports than firing one of these. Maybe she's doing a thesis project, Riker sneered. Studying how fast she'll wash out. The armory clerk slid a clipboard across the counter, his own smirk barely hidden. Name? Clara Harlow, she answered softly, her voice calm against the mockery echoing around her. One of the men snorted. Harlow? Never heard of her. Sounds like a librarian, not a sniper. Clara didn't respond. She picked up the pen, signed her name, and adjusted her glasses. The clerk eyed her paperwork, then disappeared into the racks. When he returned, he wasn't carrying one of the polished precision rifles given to the other candidates. Instead, he set down a battered, decades-old bolt-action .50 caliber with a scratched scope and worn stock. This one's yours, he said, chuckling. Guess supplies tight. The soldiers howled in laughter again. Riker slapped the bench hard enough to rattle the ammo crates. They're giving her museum pieces now. Perfect. Maybe they'll issue her a musket next. Clara quietly accepted the weapon, running her fingers over the scarred steel. She didn't complain. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she adjusted the bipod and examined the optics with meticulous care, as though she'd been expecting this. Sergeant Hale, the gruff program instructor with 3 decades of combat experience, stood in the doorway with arms crossed. He scanned the room, his gaze pausing on Clara. Listen, lady, Hale muttered, his voice low and rough. You're stepping into a shark tank. These men eat each other alive, let alone outsiders. You don't have the background, the record, or the scars. So if you're here looking for an easy badge to hang on your wall, turn around now. Clara looked up, calm and steady. I'm not here for badges, Sergeant. I'm here to see if I can do it. The laughter continued around her, but something in her eyes, quiet, unshakable, made Hale hesitate before dismissing her outright. The first day on the range was supposed to be a simple warm-up, controlled groupings at mid-range, nothing the seasoned candidates would even break a sweat over. Yet for Clara, the environment was suffocating. Fort Ironvale's sniper course sprawled across a high desert plateau, where the wind cut sharp and dry through the canyons. Dust devils swirled across the firing lanes, dancing between steel targets staked hundreds of yards away. The sun beat down mercilessly, bleaching the red earth and stinging every unprotected inch of skin. Candidates sprawled across the firing line in practiced rhythm. Spotters called adjustments. Magazines clicked. The booming cracks of rifles echoed off the cliffs like rolling thunder. Riker lay stretched out just 2 lanes from Clara, his voice carrying above the noise. Hey, sweetheart! Careful with that relic they gave you. The recoil might snap you in half. His squad snickered. A few others didn't laugh but didn't intervene either. In a course this brutal, survival often meant staying invisible. Clara ignored them, laying her battered rifle on the ground. She pulled out a worn notebook, pages filled with neat handwriting, weather notes, and ballistic calculations. She set a thread dangling from her rifle barrel, watching it shift in the wind. Torres, watching from the next lane, raised an eyebrow. "You seriously using a string? What is this, 1940? Clara didn't respond. She adjusted her bipod, made 3 tiny scope corrections, and settled into position. When the firing order began, Riker went first. His Barrett barked like a cannon, the shots slamming into steel with satisfying force. His spotter shouted, "Bullseye, center mass!" Riker grinned, rolling his shoulders as if to say, "That's how professionals do it." One by one, the candidates fired, sending tight groupings into their targets. Hale stalked up and down the line, barking corrections and insults with equal measure. Then came Clara's turn. The instructor's voice carried sharp. "Lane 7. Fire when ready." The range fell oddly quiet. Even the men who mocked her leaned back, curious in spite of themselves. Clara exhaled slowly, letting her vision blur at the edges until only the target remained clear. Her father's voice lingered in her memory, steady, calm. "The rifle is only metal. You are the balance that steadies it." She squeezed the trigger. The rifle roared, kicking her shoulder. A heartbeat later, the steel target rang with a solid metallic note. Through the scope, her shot sat near dead center. Hale grunted, expression unreadable. Riker leaned over, scowling. "Fluke," he muttered. "Beginner's luck." Clara simply cycled the bolt, chambered another round, and fired again. Ping! The second impact landed nearly on top of the first, touching holes. This time, no one laughed. She fired a third. Then a fourth. Each shot carved into the same cluster, the steel plate trembling from the force. By the time she set her rifle down, a clean group of 4 clustered within an inch sat gleaming in the sun. Silence lingered across the line. Then Hale finally spoke, voice low but carrying. "Lane 7, group confirmed. Tightest on the line." Clara adjusted her glasses and quietly noted wind direction in her book, as if nothing unusual had happened. Riker's jaw tightened. His mocking grin was gone, replaced by something sharper, resentment. The shark tank had noticed her. And sharks, when threatened, didn't laugh. They circled. The first week at Fort Ironvale was designed to strip every candidate down to raw nerves. Dawn began with punishing runs across the jagged plateau, packs weighted heavy enough to crush shoulders, followed by hours of weapons drills under the scorching sun. Meals were short, water breaks rare. Every day, at least one candidate quit, muttering curses as they signed their discharge papers. Clara did not quit. She ran alone at the back of the formation, steady and deliberate. When the others collapsed in the shade after training, she stayed on the range, adjusting her rifle, logging weather patterns, or practicing dry fire drills until her hands ached. It didn't go unnoticed. By midweek, the ridicule had sharpened. Riker made a sport of it, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look at her," he sneered one evening in the mess hall, pointing at Clara scribbling in her notebook. "Writing poetry about bullets. Maybe she'll charm the targets with sonnets instead of shooting them." The men around him erupted in laughter. Torres smirked but said nothing. A few newer candidates shifted uncomfortably but kept their heads down. Clara calmly finished her meal, closed her notebook, and walked out without a word. That silence infuriated Riker more than any retort would have. 2 nights later, Clara discovered the first sabotage. She entered the equipment cage to retrieve her rifle for early morning practice. The battered M82 looked the same at first glance, until she tried to chamber a round. The bolt jammed halfway. On closer inspection, she found fine grit packed into the chamber, a deliberate move meant to foul the weapon. She didn't storm to the instructors. She didn't accuse anyone. Instead, she carried the rifle to her bunk, disassembled the entire mechanism, and spent hours with a toothbrush and cloth, carefully cleaning every grain of sand until the bolt ran smooth again. By dawn, she was back on the range, firing as though nothing had happened. Hale noticed. The grizzled instructor watched through binoculars as Clara adjusted her shots in the early morning light, her face calm, her breathing steady. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. But her discipline radiated like heat off desert stone. When the morning drills began, Riker was already waiting with fresh venom. "Careful out there, Clara," he called with mock cheer. "Wouldn't want your antique rifle falling apart mid-shot. I heard they pulled that thing from a museum exhibit." His squad laughed again, but this time Hale barked from the tower. "Enough, Riker. Save your lungs for the course." For the first time, Clara saw Riker's smirk falter. Hale rarely intervened in candidate banter. The fact that he had now, even slightly, meant something. Still, Clara knew the sharks weren't done circling. They were only beginning to test her blood in the water. And in the weeks to come, the water would turn dark. The second week raised the stakes. Targets were pushed farther out, 700, 800, then 900 yards. The crosswinds across the plateau grew more unpredictable, buffeting bullets into the dirt. Every miss meant another punishment run, and soon boots pounded the desert trails until blisters turned raw. By now, the candidates had divided into two camps: Riker's loyal circle, who thrived on bravado and cutting down others, and the quiet observers who kept their distance, watching how the game played out. Clara, as always, stood apart. It was during a night navigation drill that the next sabotage struck. Candidates were ordered to locate and mark distant targets under darkness, using only low-light optics. Clara crouched over her battered rifle, aligning her sights, when she noticed something wrong. Her elevation knob, normally stiff and precise, spun freely in her hand. Loose. She removed the scope cap and found the internal screws stripped, deliberately over-torqued. Her optics were effectively useless. From the shadows, Riker's low chuckle carried. "Problem, Harlow? Need a magnifying glass instead of a scope?" Clara didn't respond. Instead, she improvised. She shifted to iron sights, laughable at that distance, but logged the wind direction, terrain angles, and moonlight. She marked her target locations by memory, sketching quick diagrams in her notebook. At dawn, when instructors reviewed accuracy, most candidates had clean digital logs from their optics. Clara's notebook was the only hand-drawn submission. Hale turned the pages, brows furrowing. "You free-handed all this?" "Yes, Sergeant," she said evenly. He stared for a long moment, then set the notebook down. "Accuracy, within 2 meters." His tone carried reluctant respect. The other candidates muttered in disbelief. Riker scowled. Later that week, during a stress fire exercise, Clara was deliberately assigned to the last lane, a notorious position where winds swirled unpredictably between rock formations. Her target system flickered with technical issues, the screen failing to register hits. Each time she fired, the console displayed miss. Riker, only a few lanes away, seized the chance. "Looks like our math genius forgot her formulas," he shouted. His squad howled in approval. Hale frowned but said nothing, recording the misses. When the drill ended, Clara quietly approached the malfunctioning system, crouching to inspect the wiring. She pointed out a loose connection. The technician confirmed it: faulty equipment. Her record still showed a string of misses. Officially, the shots didn't count. Unofficially, Hale had watched her grouping through binoculars. Every round had struck the steel plate. That night, Hale stood at his office window, watching Clara run laps alone around the perimeter fence, sweat darkening her fatigues. Not one complaint. Not one appeal. Just steady, relentless work. He muttered to himself. Most people break when ignored. She's different. The mess hall at Fort Ironvale was always loud. Forks scraped on metal trays, boots thudded on the floor, voices carried in half-shouted jokes. For the exhausted candidates, it was the one place they could relax, except for Clara. When she entered tray in hand, conversations dipped into hushed murmurs. Soldiers leaned closer, whispering. Some smirked openly. Others avoided her gaze altogether. Clara moved with calm precision, sliding into an empty seat at the far end of a table. She unfolded her notebook, jotting quick notes on the morning's wind drift patterns while quietly chewing her food. It was Riker who broke the silence. He always did. Well, if it isn't Professor Harlow. He stood, raising his cup like a toast. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present our very own scholar sniper. She thinks numbers on a page can save her when the wind's in her face. The room chuckled. Torres smirked into his tray. Even a few who weren't part of Riker's circle grinned nervously, caught in the gravity of his confidence. Riker wasn't done. He strutted closer, tapping her notebook with a greasy finger. Tell me, Clara, are you writing your resignation speech? Or maybe your diary entry? Dear Dad, today I almost hit the target, but the big mean wind said no. The hall erupted in laughter. Clara calmly set down her fork, wiped the notebook page where his finger had left a smear, and continued writing. Not a word. Not even a glance at him. Her silence felt heavier than a retort. Riker's smirk faltered. He leaned closer, voice low and cutting. You think ignoring me makes you better? You're nothing. A civilian nerd who wandered into the wrong program. When you crack, and you will, I'll be the one watching. Still, she said nothing. Major Hale, standing near the exit, observed the entire exchange. His weathered face betrayed no emotion, but inwardly he noted something strange. Riker had tried to draw blood, and Clara hadn't given him the satisfaction. No flash of anger. No broken composure. Later that night, Riker ranted in the barracks, loud enough for everyone to hear. She's a fraud. Mark my words, she'll choke on the big stage. The instructors will cut her loose, and I'll be right there to see it. The others laughed or stayed quiet, but Clara, alone in her quarters, sat with her notebook under the lamplight. She flipped to a fresh page and wrote in neat block letters. The louder they mock, the steadier I must become. Then she closed her eyes, breathing in a slow four-count rhythm. The storm outside could rage. Inside, she built silence like armor. The desert plateau turned black after sundown. The moon hid behind a blanket of clouds, and the only light came from the dim glow of perimeter lamps and the sweep of the watchtower searchlights. Clara moved quietly across the gravel path, her canteen in hand. She had just left the latrine when she heard it, a sharp, muffled crack in the distance. Not the usual echo of recruits firing blanks and drills. This was live ammunition, unmistakable, forbidden after hours. She paused, heart steady, and followed the sound toward the restricted training sector. The chain-link fence rattled in the breeze, and through a narrow gap between two panels she saw movement. Riker, Torres, and two others. They were sprawled in prone positions, rifles glinting under the starlight. Every few seconds, the silence broke with another shot, the muzzle flashes lighting their faces in brief bursts. And the sound, deep, vicious, told her they weren't using standard rounds. Armor-piercing ammunition, restricted for live combat. Riker's laugh carried across the sand. That's how you do it, boys. Real training. None of this watered-down qualification garbage. When the finals come, I'll be untouchable. Torres barked back. The others don't stand a chance. Especially our little librarian. By the time she lines up, I'll be long gone at the top of the leaderboard. The group laughed, their voices thick with arrogance. Clara stayed in the shadows, notebook clutched against her chest. Every detail etched itself into her mind, the illegal rounds, the time, the location. It was enough. She slipped back toward the barracks, reporting the violation directly to the duty officer that night. The next morning, the range was buzzing with rumors. Instructors swept the restricted sector, but when they arrived, the ground was clean. Brass casings gone. Targets wiped. Riker and his crew stood tall in formation, their alibis airtight. When Hale confronted Clara in his office, his tone was sharp. You're accusing half this unit of rule-breaking. Do you have proof? Clara kept her eyes forward. I saw them, Sergeant. I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. Hale sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Without evidence, it's just words. And around here, words can bury you faster than a bullet. Word spread fast. By noon, the mess hall was alive with whispers. She's trying to sabotage them. Afraid of real competition. Classic civilian, thinks rules bend around her. That evening, Riker made sure everyone heard his voice. Careful, boys. Don't walk near Clara after dark. She might accuse you of war crimes. The laughter was cruel, echoing through the barracks. Clara returned to her quarters in silence. She sat at her desk, opened her notebook, and wrote a single line beneath her careful calculations. Truth needs no defense. It survives louder lies. But even as she wrote it, the isolation began to press in heavier than ever. By the third week, Clara's world had narrowed into silence. Meals were the worst. The moment she entered the mess hall, conversations thinned into whispers. Some recruits stared openly, others turned their backs as though her presence tainted the air. No one sat beside her. Trays shifted away when she reached for a seat. On the firing line, the ridicule sharpened. Instructors called Lane 7, with a subtle tone of expectation, everyone waiting for her to falter. Riker fed the crowd with jabs at every chance. Maybe she's practicing yoga breathing again. Careful, Clara, don't trip on that notebook. Targets are this way, sweetheart. The laughter rolled like waves. But Clara didn't bite. She simply took her lane, adjusted her rifle, and began her methodical process. One morning, when she opened her gun case, her stomach dropped. The scope lens was smeared with grease. A petty sabotage, but effective. The view through the optics was a blur of fingerprints. She didn't call out the saboteur. She didn't storm to hail. Instead, she pulled a cloth from her pocket, carefully cleaned the glass, and proceeded as if nothing had happened. Her shot grouping that morning was again tight enough to draw Hale's eye. He stood in the tower, binoculars trained on her. Other candidates swayed in frustration, missing half their targets in the heavy gusts. Clara, with her scrap of thread hanging from the barrel, compensated shot after shot. Hale muttered under his breath. Unflinching. Damn unflinching. That evening, Clara's silence weighed heavier than the desert heat. In her quarters, she unrolled her father's old ballistic diagrams, running her finger along the neat notes in his handwriting. She remembered his voice. When the field turns hostile, when every man doubts you, let the wind be your ally. The wind doesn't care if you belong. It only cares if you understand it. She set the diagrams aside and wrote in her own notebook. Isolation tests more than strength. It tests whether silence can become steel. In the barracks, Riker wasn't celebrating his own progress anymore. He was seething. Clara hadn't cracked under pressure, hadn't quit after the sabotage, hadn't even raised her voice when her name was dragged through the dirt. To him, that silence was an insult greater than any defiance. And he wasn't about to let her walk untouched into the elimination rounds. The qualifying chute was designed to break people. Candidates had one chance. 20 rounds at varying distances, under shifting winds, with instructors watching every move. Miss too many, and you were out. By dawn, the range was alive with tension. The desert winds gusted hard, flags whipping on their poles. Candidates lined up with rifles, helmets glinting, faces tight with nerves. Clara stood at lane 9, rifle steady, notebook open at her side. She had already mapped the morning's wind patterns in neat figures. While others chewed their lips or muttered prayers, she breathed slow and deep. Lane 9, barked the instructor. Ready. She settled in prone, lined up her first shot, exhaled, and squeezed. The rifle bucked strangely. Her shot veered wide, a clean miss. She blinked, recalibrated, and tried again. Another miss. From the sidelines, Riker's laugh carried like a whip. Guess the math doesn't add up today. Clara's pulse quickened, but she kept her face calm. She adjusted windage, elevation. Her calculations were sound. But when she fired again, the bullet went astray. Something was wrong. Not her. The rifle. She snapped the magazine free, checked the chamber, then the scope. A faint, almost invisible misalignment in the mount. Her scope had been tampered with. Sabotage again. Lane 9, continue, the instructor barked. She had seconds. The rules forbade swapping rifles, and stopping to complain would brand her a liability. The entire line of candidates was watching. Hale, from the tower, leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. Clara exhaled, set the rifle aside for a heartbeat, and unclipped the notebook strapped to her belt. The whispers started. Is she quitting? She's writing? In the middle of the trial? She flipped to a page filled with pre-measured firing solutions, raw ballistics stripped of reliance on optics. She measured the target distance with her eyes alone, scribbled a correction, and then did the unthinkable. She removed the scope entirely. Now she had only iron sights against targets designed for long-range precision. Riker snorted. She's dead. Absolutely dead. Clara steadied her breathing, adjusted for the gust pushing across the range, and fired. Crack. Bullseye. The range went silent. One by one, she sent rounds downrange. Not every shot was perfect. At this range, with only irons, it couldn't be, but enough landed dead center to keep her in the running. When the buzzer finally sounded, Clara laid her rifle down with steady hands. Riker's smirk was gone, replaced by a hard line of disbelief. Hale, high in the tower, allowed himself the faintest flicker of a grin. She didn't just survive sabotage. She adapted faster than half the veterans out here. That night, Clara sat alone in her quarters, hands still faintly trembling. She opened her notebook and wrote. They can break the tools. They cannot break the method. She underlined it once, firm and deliberate. But outside, in the shadows of the barracks, Riker's voice was low and venomous. She should have been eliminated today. Next time, she won't walk away so lucky. The qualification scores were posted at dawn. Candidates crowded around the board, jostling shoulders, breasts held tight. Numbers mattered here. They were the currency of survival. Clara approached quietly, notebook in hand. Her name sat near the middle, not the top, not the bottom. Safe. A miracle, considering the sabotage. Whispers floated around the crowd. How did she pass with irons? No way she did that legit. Guy in the tower must have taken pity on her. But others, quieter voices, carried a different weight. Still, she didn't fold. Would you have kept firing without a scope? Riker pushed through the cluster, eyes scanning the board. His score perched in the top 3, exactly where he liked it. But when he saw Clara's name still on the list, something dark settled across his features. She should have washed out, he muttered, loud enough for the room. Some people don't know when they're trespassing. Clara ignored him, walking past with calm steps, though her pulse drummed hard in her throat. Later that day, during endurance drills on the obstacle course, Hale stood with arms crossed, watching Clara. Others grunted and cursed through the rope climbs, the mud crawls, the wall hauls. Clara moved slower, but deliberate, studying each obstacle like a problem to be solved. Where others wasted energy, she conserved. Where others slipped in haste, she balanced. When she reached the high wall, recruits leapt and clawed their way over. Clara stopped, scanning the grain of the wood, the slant of the support beam. She wedged her foot in, found leverage, and scaled it with mechanical precision. From the sidelines, one instructor muttered, "She doesn't have power, but she's efficient." Hale's reply was flat but weighted. "Efficiency wins wars." That night, Clara returned to her bunk to find her mattress slit open, stuffing scattered like entrails. Her personal diagrams torn, pages fluttering in the fan's breeze. She froze, the destruction heavy in her chest. Slowly, she gathered the pages, smoothed them, stacked them carefully. She didn't cry. Didn't shout. She only picked up a pencil and wrote on the cleanest scrap she could find. They escalate because they cannot outlast. Then she folded it neatly into her notebook, the only weapon she truly trusted. In the barracks corner, Riker leaned against his bunk, watching her in silence. The laughter was gone now. His eyes were colder, sharper. Not the mockery of a bully, but the calculation of a man who had decided his rival wasn't going away. And Hale, reviewing the day's reports in his office, tapped his pen against the table. The evidence was mounting. Clara's resilience wasn't luck. It was design. He circled her name on the roster, then underlined it once. The desert night was colder than steel. Hale stood alone on the high ridge, a single steel target set nearly a mile away, half hidden by the dark and the wind. It was a test no recruit had faced, because it wasn't sanctioned. Behind him, Clara climbed the ridge, rifle in hand. Hale had summoned her without explanation. When she reached him, chest rising with steady breaths, he handed her a single round. No notebook. No scope. Just you and the wind. Clara looked at the target, a faint shimmer in the distance. The shot was nearly impossible. A trap, perhaps. But her father's words whispered back, the wind doesn't care if you belong. It only cares if you understand it. She lay prone, pressed cheek to iron sights, and closed her eyes for a heartbeat. She felt the wind tug at her hair, listened to the low whistle through the rocks. Then she opened her eyes, adjusted half a breath off instinct, and fired. The crack echoed into the silence. A second later, the faint clang of steel rang across the desert. Hale's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate. You don't belong here, Clara. Her chest sank until he added, you belong above it. Word of the impossible shot spread through camp like wildfire. Some said it was luck. Others whispered it was proof. Riker, hearing it, smashed a chair against the wall in rage. His sneer couldn't mask the truth. Clara had stepped beyond his reach. By the final evaluation week, the whispers that once mocked her had turned into silence of another kind, the silence of respect. Some candidates even glanced her way for cues, mimicking her calm breathing, her deliberate pace. When the names of those selected for the elite sniper cadre were read aloud, Clara's was among them. Riker's was not. He left camp with eyes burning holes into her back, but Clara didn't watch him go. She was already looking forward, toward the windswept range that had tested her and shaped her into something no sabotage could break. That night, in the solitude of her bunk, she wrote her final note into the battered notebook. They built walls to keep me out. I built methods to climb higher. Steel is not born, it's forged. And for the first time since she had arrived at Camp Ashford, Clara closed the notebook with a quiet smile.